welcome back to Definitely Not Definitive. I'm Ken.
And I'm Bethany.
And we're just a couple of goofs in love that love doing some reaction videos together.
Yeah, we do.
And so we're doing another Why You Wouldn't Survive series by Wasatch Gaming. This is Gears of War, Why You Wouldn't Survive the Gears of War Locust Horde. So we checked out a little bit of Gears of War before. We've done some intros and some other trailers. And so, yeah, going to learn a little bit more about Gears of War and then why we would completely die.
I was going to say, I don't think I ever assumed I would survive Gears of War. So I appreciate their specificity in specifically this is the Locust Horde. Like maybe there's a sliver of hope that you would survive in some other capacity. But yeah, no, I definitely expect to die and I'm curious to learn how that would happen.
All right, you guys weren't that big of fans of the whole Why You Wouldn't Survive a Pokemon War thing, so I figured let's get back to a more carnage-oriented series again. So this time around, we are stating the obvious on a universe that ups the violence and bloodshed to a level where Mortal Kombat and Celebrity Deathmatch would be proud. This week, we are covering Stick a Chainsaw on a Gun and Make It Iconic, Rise of the Underminers, all aboard the coal train, baby. Rip and tear, things that go boom. In the night, you can vote who dies. End of the world, not a tropical island. Pavement-sucking genocide from Down Under game series itself. This week, we tell you why you wouldn't survive the Gears of War Locust Horde. As always, we have to delve into the lore of the series to actually size up the reality that these people live in and the actuality we work our 9-to-5s in. As for the humans, or I should say Sarans, the history of our differently named species is totally different from what we know as humans, even though they can call themselves humans at times. A different planet than Earth called Sera is the origin planet of the Sarans, another term for humans. It might get a little confusing, just remember Sarans equal humans and vice versa. They evolved from primates, religious and scientific debates aside, and went on to create societies, forge weapons, and conquer the lands across Sera, eventually starting the Silver Age parallel to our medieval era, approximately 5 centuries before the current timeline where humans were mostly divided between the two great empires Kashkur and Gorasnaya. These empires waged war with swords and chariots until the Age of Armageddon, which brought forth consistent violent warfare lasting nearly 1,000 years. Tired of the senseless bloodshed over land and riches, humanity eventually reached a consensus of peace. This spurred a temporary period called the Era of Silence, which allowed Saran technology, culture, and scientific pursuits to grow exponentially without the distraction of war. With war not on the forefront of human priorities also came overpopulation and the vastly depreciating reserves of energy sources. Again, the same bitterly realistic plot device as Dead Space, Fallout, Doom, and many other franchises. During an excavation for fossil fuels, humans discovered a well of not typical crude brownish blackish oil, but a bright yellow liquid later referred to as emulsion, which would be later discovered to be a living organism. For a while, it was considered useless until a Dr. Helen Cooper devised the light mass process, which gave this new emulsion extremely high capabilities of energy production at a low cost, surpassing what fossil fuels and even nuclear energies could power in total. This scientific and energetic breakthrough made oil and solar energy obsolete, rendering the looming threat of energy consumption null, but now giving countries that held these reserves to acquire economic power to reign over others, effectively throwing the entire global economy into disarray as countries that were profiting from oil reserves were bankrupt while countries that discovered emulsion reserves saw an explosion in profits, but not for long. Previous countries and governments of power would see to invading and waging war over this new resource. This is pretty much what would be going on in our world as well. Now, Saran ideologies culminated over time. Starting off as a minor political faction, the Coalition of Ordered Governments, or COGS, was a socialist organization that rose to power with the advent of emulsion and the political and economic strife it created. This rise was mainly as a countermeasure to the UIR, Union of Independent Republics, and soon the pendulum wars between these two factions waged on for a total of 79 years, breaking the temporary peace that humanity had. Defending emulsion reservoirs and key points, this war would see hundreds of thousands of casualties. It wasn't until the UIR had begun developing a technology to create satellite-based superweapons that this war finally started to see a solution in the nearby horizon, reminiscent of the space warfare via satellites that former US President Ronald Reagan proposed in the 1980s. However, the COGS raided the compound knowing of the weapon's destructive capabilities and took the schematics and resources for themselves, leading into the Battle of Bonberg. 2 years later, the UIR besieged COG forces until the satellite weapon known as the Hammer of Dawn was finally unleashed thanks to the developments of Atom Phoenix, raining down a hellish fire that destroyed 5 UIR ships and force them to retreat and eventually sign an armistice to end the almost 8-decade war. This led to the Cogs establishing dominance in the ideologies of world politics and numerous governments that once held UIR leadership. This just about New World Order only lasted for 6 weeks, and then everything changed when the Locust Nation attacked. Emergence Day, or E-Day, set a new course for the Sarans when they realized they were not the only intelligent species on the planet Sera. Erupting from the ground beneath their feet, the Sarans were ambushed in mostly every major city on the planet. This subterranean surprise attack was so overwhelming with the sheer numbers, weaponry, and diversity in the new Locust forces that 25% of the total human population was exterminated within the first day. With major factions of military resistance failing to an attack that swept them from under the rug, humanity was clueless as to why this was occurring, considering all authorities had no control as men, women, and children were slaughtered without a hint of mercy or hesitation. Any surviving citizens would seek refuge within Cog safety compounds, but resources would begin to wane fast. The only major part of human civilization left that held any kind of sanctum against the burrowing strategies of the Locust Horde was on the Jacinto Plateau, built upon solid granite in any far-out islands, showing that their most successful means of attack were literally tunneling and coming out from under their enemies to swiftly overwhelm, execute, and harvest. This tunneling civilization was an unknown to man. No one had even made contact with them or knew of their existence, and more importantly, their capabilities, even with the highest intelligence agencies the world's governments had to offer. Well, all except for 2 people, which will be discussed as we approach discussing the second fatal threat to mankind. What overwhelmed the humans in such a short time was the terrifying brutality and arsenal the Locust Horde had at their disposal upon emergence, as well as salvaging any and all human resources and weaponry to up their lethality. With the Locusts living in the intricate tunnel system deep in the Earth's crust with even 2 sections, the inner and outer hollows, the hollows harbored creatures that were indigenous to this network and were inducted into the armed military might of these reptilian bipeds. The prominent species and infantry of the Locust Horde were labeled as drones, working to dethrone humanity's foothold on the surface world. Ironically, this species originated from humans, as in the onset of the Pendulum Wars, human miners that had been working in the emulsion of the hollows became severely mutated into creatures known as the Sires, with their children being genetically mutated even further. The government covered up this abomination and banished them to the hollows, sending the kids off to an experimental lab far away, thereafter quarantining any civilians or workers from entering the catacombs of the hollows any further. The 7 decades following had the Sires mating and eventually creating the race of drones we know today. The typical drone stands on average 7 feet tall, with most having a high muscle mass and rough skin, making them much more resilient and tougher than a typical human being, especially for specialists that work with explosives. They have multiple internal organs, a wide peripheral and almost prominent night vision due to the darkness of the hollows, and have a heightened sense of smell. Basically, even with the lowest ranking officers of this army can take even heavy amounts of gunfire, blood loss, and can ambush in the dead of night with ease. However, they are extra sensitive to bright flashes of light, so they will be wearing goggles most of the time. As a majority, they are naturally violent and quick to attack, and can be skilled in all types of weaponry, including snipers, flamethrowers, demolitionists, and whatever guns they can acquire from dead humans, and can tame and master creatures of the hollow. Other variants of these drones include a multitude of versions of the Boomer. Not you. Take some Pepto-Bismol and sit in the corner, buddy. The Boomer is a hulking version of a drone that is severely lacking intelligence, but can be deadly proficient with either explosive launchers, miniguns, and bladed shields. But they will scream what they're doing before they even attack, so they're not really stealthy, and they're more like anime characters announcing what attack they're about to execute. You're probably wondering, do they have sex? Answer, well, actually, you don't want to know, but if you do, the whole part of this race is that they are overtly violent. So the females of this species, much like the females in the animal kingdom like bonobos, hyenas, anglerfish, and a majority of insects, are superior in strength. However, the female locust is referred to as a berserker with ample reason. Bulkier, more aggressive, and faster than their male counterparts, they can rip through human forces with ease. They are even more susceptible to incendiary fire and barely take damage from small firearms. However, they are also completely blind, relying on their even more advanced smell and hearing to locate their targets. However, this can also lead to friendly fire amongst their ranks. Adam Phoenix has hypothesized that the locusts breed by, I hate to say it, but rape. Since the females of the species are so violent to just about everything, they have been said to be chained down and forced to reproduce in order to keep the numbers of the locust population ever growing. They do have a hierarchy and militaristic system in their horde and show a great amount of strategic execution, led by Queen Mira, a former scientist who was also exiled by the government's attempt to cover up the emulsion mutations, established dominance in the growing numbers of the locust and militarized them. Even though mostly brutish with the leadership of Mira, their society and race were given direction and absolute cunning wartime strategies to ward off the Lambent that were coming down on them and to bring down humanity. Ground troops tend to inherently try to charge into battle, a tactic that cogs and human infantry assumed all drones do. However, commanders like General Ram and the Queen coordinated these forces on the field to attack in a coordinated effort that would overwhelm humans. Besides the capabilities of the drones, they command animals and creatures created or that were native to the hollows of Serra, commanding giant beasts like the 50-foot tall Brumac, who with its sheer strength alone can tip over tanks and large mounted vehicles, even plow through structures. They are fitted with machine guns and artillery on its back to basically be a living, breathing tank leviathan. On the opposite end of the size scale, we have tickers, small rodent reptilian hybrids that click as they move. They're hard to spot in a stressful situation and are fairly deadly considering the fact that drones strap tanks of emulsion to their back in order to explode with the slightest amount of impact, to either act as landmines for armored vehicles or kamikaze cogs and other surface-dwelling ground troops. Then there are the grunts, I mean wretches that are large in numbers, but basically used as cannon fodder to overwhelm Sarans and deplete their ammunition while drones advance. These guys crave human flesh and will eat you alive if pinned down. If you're an arachnophobic, a corpser may send you into a heart attack before it even kills you. One of the primary natural denizens of the hollows that the drones use to burrow underground at rapid rates and surface stealthily. Able to destroy a multitude of things with their jagged spider claws, it takes the capabilities of heavy cannon fire or satellite strikes to take them out. These guys are the reason the locusts are able to come from the ground so easily and overwhelm. The drones are able to command and conquer the land, so surely you can try flying away. Nope! Reavers will fly and take you out with mounted weaponry or be sniped down by the locust rider on its back. They can also land and act as smaller tanks to blow through forces. Locust forces will also ride atop blood mounts, which use their razor-sharp tusks to impale enemies. And most disgustingly, they command cedars that are naturally deadly on their own, but will shoot insect-like nemesis to swarm and devour humans. And also krill that can swarm like carnivorous insects. So basically, it's like they have their own Pokemon that they're sending out, calling back to my previous video. The hollows in which all of this life existed and was created in was actually burrowed by gigantic worm-like creatures known as riftworms. They made these gigantic-like tunnels because they are spanning the length of between 8 to 10 miles and half a mile wide diameter. They were regarded as gods by the Locust Horde, creating the religion Trinity of Worms. However, they are all but lying dormant and do not pose a threat unless awakened. With the use of their militaristic strategies, sheer numbers, brute strength, and multi-useful creatures, they have advantages to be very successful in every situation. These are everything that will erupt from beneath the earth and attack without warning. But you may ask that a race of this size and nature would have been noticed by some of the billions of people on the planet. Well, before Emergence Day, the main character Marcus Phoenix's parents had come in contact with the locusts. His mother Elaine Phoenix went further into the hollows that had been producing the emulsion and discovered the locust race and their natural enemy, the Lambency. She researched both for a time 9 years before Emergence Day and was eventually murdered by drones. Her husband, Adam Phoenix, discovered her dead body as well as the data she had collected while in the hollow and learned of an upcoming attack on the surface. This attack was due mostly in part to a long-standing civil war that the locusts had been engaged in with a creature that erupted from the emulsion. Adam attempted to bargain with Queen Mira, who was desperate to get rid of the lambent species, to give him 5 years to construct a weapon to exterminate the lambency infection, just as he did constructing the Hammer of Dawn to end the Pendulum Wars. After 4 years, the lambent crawling further up the hollows had pushed the locusts enough to where they felt forced to surface to gain ground back against their looming threat. The humans were carelessly using the hollows as a dumping ground for hazardous waste, and with the Pendulum Wars coming into full swing, Adam Phoenix had invested all of his efforts into the Hammer of Dawn instead of a cure to the lambent infection. The time had run out and the order to attack was commenced. 1 year into the excursion following Emergence Day, leaders of the COG realized how futile most counter efforts were against the ever-pervasive forces of the Locust Horde. Ethical dilemmas ensued, debating over the use of the Hammer of Dawn technology, but on a much more grander and destructive scale. The signing of the Fortification Act initiated the only counterattack the humans had left with their backs against a wall, and one of the only safe havens left in the Jacinto Plateau. Knowing the ramifications of loss and environmental impact versus allowing Locust infantry to consistently salvage deadly human weaponry as the spoils of war, the Hammer of Dawn targeted all surface level land on the planet and commenced a total and complete annihilation event. A majority of the planet was basically burned to ash instantly outside of the Jacinto Plateau, killing all above ground drones and Locust forces, but at the cost of millions and millions of innocent lives.
Yeah.
People were instantly turned to ash, frozen in time. The Hammer of Dawn strikes left behind a planet scorched enough to where it took a total of 5 days before the ashes allowed sunlight to peer through the sky. However, this, mixed with raging forest fires and the explosions of chemical plants, led to massive ground and air pollution, plunging the planet into a post-apocalyptic landscape, except for, you guessed it, the Jacinto Plateau. It took 14 years of constant warfare and near extinction before humanity concocted and perfected the light mass bomb, a sort of emulsion nuclear device that was mapped out by a sonic locator to map out the hollows and absolutely destroy the outer hollows. However, this absolute destruction reigned as a short-lived victory. The Locust Horde had been dealt a great blow, but it also had awakened the Riftworm. The priest of the Locust religion managed to take control of the Riftworm, and this big-ass worm took to destroying major military outposts. This deity could only be killed by a skilled team being swallowed and then having them sever all of its hearts, risking never being able to escape its insides. I will stop here and go ahead and say I will be doing a follow-up video of the series to cover the impending enemy that the Lambent imposed on not only the Locusts, but humans, as they are a completely different threat in the way that they fight and basically are like the Flood from Halo, and plus this does encompass the end of the Gears of War trilogy. Usually I discuss what this game's scenarios with the deadly forces would be on a worldwide scale. However, this time around it was a threat on a worldwide scale and the ramifications were projected quite vehemently. This scenario is probably the most realistic outcome on how humanity would react to a new energy source and a new war and then have to respond for an invasion of this caliber. So impactful it was that the humans of the Saren universe changed their calendar system to BE and AE, before emergence and after emergence. Previously discussed series like Halo and Dead Space were primarily showing their epidemics unfold in mostly isolated pockets away from Earth to demonstrate their evil carnation's fortitude, with plenty of warning and developments to show what kind of threat they are before reaching Earth in any capacity, to possibly give time to repair and partially engage the not so totally unknown enemy, like the Reapers from Mass Effect invading Earth, even with prominent skepticism. However, Gears of War has an outcome where the threat immediately shows up on our homeworld and proceeds to show what it actually means to us and our well-being as a species. The only big differences being that our world holds multiple different governments and power structures comparative to Gears of War with the COGS and UIR. Planet Earth would also be much more difficult to coordinate a synchronized attack on all major capitals, since much of the landmass is separated by large expanses of ocean. Corpsers and riftworms would risk being flooded trying to burrow beneath the depths of the seven seas, versus Gears of War, where almost one gigantic landmass with scattered islands is a lot easier to manage for burrowing. It is reasonable to think there would be fuel resource wars, but I'm not going to discuss that because I've discussed it 4 or 5 freaking times now, and it's just the bitter reality of what this planet is going to end up becoming. If these attacks were to be successfully coordinated though, there would be varying success between each city across the globe that was struck. A military deployment in an attack on a city like Washington DC would have a considerable hastily created defense from the army, versus the capital of Iceland, Reykjavik, with limited military. They would be overwhelmed instantaneously. Even with the swift retaliation, the numbers and size of the Locust infantry would be able to easily take gunfire and military strike, with the initial body count of civilians reaching the millions across the globe pretty quickly. Depending on if we can use whatever advanced weaponry and drone strikes to take out the large threats like the Brumac, the numbers would still see to it that the ground forces would be wiped out and their weapons added to the Locust Horde. Horde. Much like the Sarens, we would need to resort to deadly nuclear strikes, and if we have adapted to emulsion enough, using the equivalent of that magnitude of bombing. We haven't quite mastered the technology to use something like the Hammer of Dawn. However, Trump's Space Force may or may not create something similar to that. I guess we'll see with how that political climate leads to. I'm not leaning left or right. We would end up resorting in the same way and turning the planet to a Fallout-like hellscape and still fight them to the bitter end, especially since attacking them with that magnitude could awaken a riftworm and just make things worse, even though we destroyed a good population of their forces. Most of us would be dead on the emergence and then either die from the nuclear option, dying to lack of resources, or dying on the battlefield since all able-bodied people were deployed to fight, even those people in prison, unless you were put into medical farming or even breeding farming. Yeah, they actually had women there just so they could breed farm and keep the human population up. That about wraps up the magnitude and tremors of the Locust Horde. We will eventually talk about the even lower depths of the Hollows when the Lambent will emerge for a whole other video. Did I miss anything about the Locust Horde that you feel like I should have discussed? Did I not talk about the actual original trilogy and the story of Marcus Phoenix enough? Too much story and explaining the forces? Complain to me in the comments. Always love reading those. I hold polls on the community tab every once in a while to figure out what we should cover next. So go vote on that. Donate to my Patreon so I can get motivated to make more videos faster. Check out my merch store and get a shirt of the one-man cheeseburger apocalypse himself, or you could represent how you hate everything, or represent the WoW brand and get an official WoW Such Gaming shirt. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and ring that notification bell to see more in the future.
Okay, it was cool learning about Gears of War. This was a good video because it really went into the lore, so I appreciate that. So, you talked about the comments like, was this too much story? I'm like, no, it was good getting the story. I mean, it was good getting that backstory before we dive into like the carnage of the Locust Horde.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I said going into this that Gears of War being the post-apocalyptic wasteland that we know it to be, I would definitely be dead. It could actually be worse. Like, as a woman, I could be in a breeding farm. Yeah. Either as a locust or as a person. So it just kind of sucks for the future.
Yeah, I would definitely, maybe I want to survive the first wave because and then just get blasted out with when they nuked everything or whatever. Because that would be a lot quicker, and then I'd rather have that because I feel like the Locust Horde, they like take their time and like I see them torturing and just being savage about it, and so I would not want to die by that much. Just take me out in the blast.
Yeah, they have a lot of different critters. It's not the right word, but they have a lot of different critters at their disposal for conquest and battle. And the one like bright spot of levity was when he called the ones grunts, and I was like, yay! Yeah. But other than that, this is like humanity is dead. This is really dark and depressing, and they have giant spiders with like crab claws. Yep. I mean, does it get much worse than that?
And if I was on the battlefield, I'd probably search out those things that had like the little bomb strapped to them, and I would just jump at it and shoot it and like just blow up like that.
You always mocked me for like my go out in the first wave mentality, but I'm just putting out here.
Well, there are certain times where you want to go out in the first wave. This is not a fun world.
I remember like when I was younger, the idea of surviving the zombie apocalypse was like, yeah, you'd be badass, and oh, how cool, and to see like the world get like restarted or whatever. And then like as you get older, you're like, I don't want to go through that shit. And that's just for a zombie apocalypse. I would argue Gears of War is potentially way worse. Mm-hmm. I respect his storytelling. I respect how much he dove into it. I respect going into the different kinds of locusts, I don't know, like species or races or whatever the different things are. And this solidified what I think we both kind of said at the beginning, which was we'd be dead. Yep. And that's okay.
Yeah. That's stuff we're figuring out. We're not survivors. But yeah, so we got another video on Gears of War for the other faction of evil creatures that we got to fight.
Okay, more factions of the Lambent.
Yeah, the Lambent. The Lambentsters. Sorry.
I can't believe you just did that.
Let us know what you thought about this down below in the comments. And if you want all of our Gears of War, Why You Wouldn't Survive reactions, check out the description of this video. We got a playlist there for you. Thanks so much for checking out our reaction for Why You Wouldn't Survive the Gears of War Locust Horde. But just keep in mind
that our reaction is definitely not definitive.